You mean to tell me humans were merely observing this whole time? The chamber descended into silence as General Corvo of the Zin Consortium gazed at the holographic projection. Every other species within the intergalactic coalition had already committed their full strength to the war effort, depleting their reserves in the protracted and brutal conflict against the Kidari. Yet, operating somewhat in the shadows, humans had remained peripheral. They had certainly dispatched aid and offered logistical assistance, but direct military engagement? Not one human vessel had participated in the conflict until this moment. Indeed, General, responded Admiral Merrick of the Archak Union, his scaled countenance revealing nothing. Humanity formally announced its intention to partake in combat operations precisely 10 minutes ago. Corvo massaged his temples, finding it hard to believe. He had encountered speculation regarding human abilities but had written them off as inflated Death-Worlder posturing. Now confronting the stark reality, he experienced an odd blend of apprehension and intrigue. Why this timing? And, more significantly, what strategy did the humans intend to employ in a struggle that had persisted for years? Display their opening maneuvers, Corvo commanded, his tone slightly sharper than he intended. The holographic representation of the galaxy zoomed into the contested territories. The Kidari fleet had constructed formidable defensive perimeters in crucial star systems, challenging any potential adversaries. Humanity's units had materialized on the fringe of the combat zone, appearing as a minor speck against the immense fleets of their foes. As the distinctive human warships materialized on the projection, whispers spread among the gathered coalition commanders. Human vessels were streamlined and compact, lacking the imposing dimensions and flashy weapon systems of other races. They appeared initially severely unprepared. "Is that all?" someone murmured doubtfully. Corvo narrowed his focus on the display, observing as the human ships formed a concentrated arrangement. There was no elaborate demonstration of strength, no extended period of positioning. In truth, to an inexperienced observer, it seemed almost laughably minimal. A solitary command ship, a small number of destroyers, and a formation of escort frigates. The humans appeared to have committed only a segment of their total fleet. The room settled into an uncomfortable stillness as everyone tried to comprehend what they were witnessing. The Kidari reacted almost instantly, adjusting their formations to address the emerging threat. The enemy perceived no compelling reason to regard the human contingent seriously. After all, no other force had succeeded in penetrating their lines in years. Then the action commenced. Corvo blinked, scarcely able to credit his own eyes. The human ships operated with a precision that approached artistry, slicing through space with astonishing velocity. Within moments, the Coalition's communication network lit up with reports of electromagnetic pulses and sensor interference. For the Kidari, it was comparable to being blindfolded amidst a tempest. What is their strategy? Admiral Merrick's usually steady composure fractured, his voice laced with a trace of awe. Electronic warfare, Corvo answered, his voice tinged with uncertainty. But this is on a scale I have never encountered. The Kidari fleets became disoriented as their targeting computers and defensive capabilities turned into little more than useless systems. Human ships darted through formations with an elegance that seemed almost nonchalant, unleashing barrages of high-speed projectiles. It wasn't the overwhelming force assaults the Coalition had come to expect. This was entirely different. Warfare distilled into a lethal dance. "Sir, the Kidari's outer defenses are crumbling," a communications officer exclaimed, eyes wide as he monitored the incoming data streams. Corvo leaned forward, concentrating intensely on the projection. This was the crucial juncture. Would the humans press their advantage or withdraw? His uncertainties were instantly dispelled as the human fleet accelerated, exploiting the confusion they had sown. Their tactics adapted seamlessly, seemingly anticipating every Kidari effort to counter them. How are they? Merrick trailed off as he observed another sector yielding to the human advance. It's as though they understood precisely where to attack. Corvo could not help but admire the spectacle. The humans maneuvered with an efficiency that was almost unnervingly robotic, and their strategy defied standard military doctrine. Most species hurled waves of vessels at their opponents, relying on superior force to penetrate defenses. Humans, on the other hand, employed precision strikes, disabling critical infrastructure and leaving the Kidari fleet to struggle like a creature deprived of its faculties. What type of weaponry are they employing? One of the coalition officers blurted, his voice a mix of dread and fascination. Their armaments appear conventional, a tactical analyst stammered, but they are utilizing them in ways we never imagined. As the minutes passed, the coalition command center fell into a stunned quiet. A complete hour had elapsed since humanity's initial move, and the Kidari's powerful armadas were now a fragmented, retreating disarray. Even the coalition's most optimistic scenarios had not predicted this degree of success. Corvo watched as the holographic map updated, revealing Kidari strongholds going offline one after another. This was more than a mere victory, it was a thorough dismantling. The humans weren't just overpowering the adversary, they were systematically deconstructing the Kidari's entire approach to battle. "Sector Gamma has fallen," the communications officer announced, breaking the silence, "and reports suggest 0 human losses." "Impossible," Merrick hissed, his scaled features twitching in disbelief. "How can they possibly sustain no casualties?" Corvo swallowed hard, his attention riveted to the tactical feed. The human fleet maintained its relentless progression, their ships navigating through debris fields and evading incoming ordnance with an apparent ease that seemed almost mocking. As another Kidari command vessel disintegrated into a fiery sphere, it became undeniable that this was not a mere stroke of luck. The humans were not simply proficient, they were operating on an entirely different echelon. "I fail to grasp it," Corvo conceded, rubbing the back of his neck. "What have they been occupied with all this time, if not participating in the fighting?" "Preparing," a new voice cut in, cool and analytical. All eyes turned towards a human officer positioned at the entrance, attired in a crisp, unadorned uniform. His sharp, unreadable gaze swept the room, as if evaluating the worth of each person present. "You label this a war," he went on, striding towards the room's center. "But to us, it is an exercise, a measure of tactical flexibility." The coalition officers exchanged hesitant glances. The human's delivery was neither boastful nor conceited. It was purely factual. Corvo clenched his jaw, uncertain whether to feel resentment or reluctant admiration. "What is your aim?" Corvo pressed, fighting to keep his voice level. "Why engage now?" The human officer tilted his head slightly, as if deliberating the best way to articulate something exceedingly obvious. "Our aim," he commenced, "is to terminate this conflict in the most efficient way feasible. As for the timing, we waited until you were prepared to accommodate our methodologies." Corvo felt a tremor travel down his spine. The phrasing was simple, almost innocuous, yet it possessed a gravity suggesting implications far exceeding anything they had conceived. "Ready? You suppose we were prepared for this?" Merrick scoffed, shaking his head. The human's focus shifted to the holographic map, where the final vestiges of the Kidari forces were being systematically taken apart. "Had you not been," he replied serenely, "this conflict would have concluded much earlier." Corvo stared at the map, grappling to assimilate the unfolding situation. The humans were pushing towards the core of Kidari territory, their advance so swift it defied logic. And yet, as he observed, a notion began to crystallize, a query he wasn't certain he desired the answer to. Just what manner of conflict had humanity been readying itself for all this time? Corvo's eyes remained fastened to the holographic display as the humans advanced deeper into Kidari space. The coalition commanders surrounding him stayed silent, captivated by the near ludicrous events unfolding. The human fleet wasn't merely fighting, it was methodically analyzing its adversaries, leveraging every vulnerability with a precision that bordered on the uncanny. "Report!" barked Admiral Merrick, breaking the stillness. "What is the status of Kidari's Central Command?" The tactical officer's gaze darted between screens, his hands trembling as he processed the incoming intelligence. "Central Command it's failing, sir. The humans have neutralized their shield grids and are launching boarding pods as we speak." Corvo felt his jaw tighten involuntarily. Kidari Central Command stood as a fortress, shielded by layers of defenses that had resisted every coalition assault for years. Now those defenses were collapsing sequentially, like brittle glass under an unceasing hammer. Boarding pods? Merrick echoed, his tone a blend of disbelief and horror. They are penetrating the interior? The human officer standing close by merely nodded, his expression impassive. Yes, he stated plainly. We find that surgical insertions are more effective than sheer force. Our objective is to seize control, not to annihilate. Corvo glanced at the officer, unable to suppress a rising sense of foreboding. These humans, with their composed bearing and deliberate maneuvers, bore no resemblance to the savage warriors he had anticipated. They were methodical, calculating, and alarmingly detached from the pandemonium they were engineering. How are they accomplishing this? Another coalition commander inquired, his voice unsteady. We have battled the Kidari for years and barely made a dent in their defenses, and now this. Training, the human officer replied factually. We have drilled for scenarios such as this long before we ever made contact with the Kidari. Space warfare, ground combat, electronic countermeasures, it is all integrated into the doctrine. Doctrine? Corvo repeated, narrowing his gaze. You make it sound as if you expected this war. The human officer turned to face Corvo, his expression revealing nothing. Expected? No. Prepared for? Always. The response sent a chill through the room. The coalition had entered the war out of necessity, driven by a critical need to protect their territories from the Kidari offensive. But the humans, they had been preparing for conflict as if it were a certainty. And now, as Corvo observed the human fleet systematically dismantling the Kidari defenses, he understood that this was not merely a demonstration of military strength, it was an exhibition of control. General Corvo? A voice crackled through the command room speakers, interrupting his reflections. It was one of the coalition's reconnaissance officers positioned near the Kidari border. The Kidari flagship is moving. It is attempting to retreat to a more fortified sector. Let me guess, Merrick said, his tone laced with bitter sarcasm. The humans have already anticipated that. The human officer didn't so much as blink. Of course, they will permit the flagship to withdraw for now. It is a classic tactic. Push them to their final stronghold where they feel secure, then eradicate even that sense of safety. Corvo could hardly believe what he was hearing. You are toying with them? He asked incredulously. Not toying, the human officer corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. We are ensuring that when they collapse entirely. No room for recovery, no chance to regroup. This war has persisted because everyone fought piecemeal. We do not. Corvo turned back to the map, watching as the Kidari fleet scrambled to reposition. Panic had clearly taken hold. The humans had violated the unspoken conventions of this conflict, operating at a level the Kidari had never previously encountered. As more sectors fell under human control, it became apparent that the Kidari weren't just losing a battle. They were being systematically undone. We are receiving reports of ground operations, the tactical officer announced, eyes wide with shock. The humans have deployed their soldiers to key Kidari planets. Merrick let out a low hiss. How are they already launching ground assaults? We have barely established space superiority. The human officer crossed his arms, eyes glued to the map. Parallel operations. While space forces disrupt and dismantle enemy fleets, ground units secure key installations. We trained for this, to overwhelm on multiple fronts simultaneously. Corvo felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Every coalition force had concentrated on one front at a time, struggling to manage the demands of space and ground combat. But the humans, they seemed to have mastered both, executing their plan with a level of coordination that bordered on inhuman. Ground reports coming in, the comms officer said, his voice barely above a whisper. The humans have neutralized the Kidari planetary defenses. No significant resistance. Corvo nearly choked on his disbelief. The Kidari planets were fortresses, shielded and armed extensively. Coalition forces had attempted for months, if not years, to breach them, with little success to show for their efforts. Yet here were the humans, seizing those planets in mere moments. What kind of soldiers are they? Someone muttered, voicing the question lingering in every mind. Our soldiers are adaptable, the human officer replied, his tone suggesting the answer was self-evident. We train them not just to fight, but to think, to analyze, adapt, and exploit weaknesses in real time. A hush settled over the room as the coalition officers absorbed this. The humans had transformed war into a science, one where victory hinged less on raw power and more on precision. It was terrifying. What is their next move? Corvo found himself asking, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. The flagship, the human officer replied without hesitation. They will let it retreat, and then they will cut off every route back to safety. Once isolated, the Kidari command will have no choice but to surrender or be wiped out. So that's it? Merrick questioned, eyes wide. They are already anticipating the endgame? Anticipating? The human officer smirked, a flicker of something almost resembling amusement crossing his face for the first time. No, they are enacting it. This war was over the moment we entered. The coalition commanders exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't just the humans' tactics or technology that unsettled them. It was their attitude. They approached war as if it were an equation to be solved, each variable accounted for, each outcome calculated. The room fell silent again as the humans continued their advance. More Kidari worlds went dark on the map, one after another, like stars winking out in a vast night sky. The holographic display now showed the Kidari flagship retreating toward its last stronghold, pursued not by a swarm of human ships, but by a calculated, relentless force. What happens if the Kidari surrender? Corvo asked, almost dreading the answer. The human officer's eyes narrowed. Then they live, he said simply. We don't fight to terminate, we fight to win, and to make sure no one ever thinks of challenging us again. Corvo nodded, swallowing hard. There was a cold logic to it, a ruthlessness that defied everything he had ever known about warfare. The humans had entered the battlefield not just to win, but to redefine what winning meant. As the map continued to shift, the Kidari's last bastion on the brink of collapse, Corvo couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger, and he had no idea what that something was. The room was cloaked in a tense silence as the holographic display revealed the final stages of the human offensive. The Kidari flagship, once a symbol of indomitable power, now appeared small and insignificant as it limped toward its last fortified sector. Its hull was scarred from earlier engagements, thrusters flickering erratically, and its once mighty escorts were little more than debris scattered across space. Corvo glanced around the command center, where coalition officers sat in stunned disbelief. Some wore expressions of awe, others fear, but none could hide their fascination with the humans' unfolding strategy. A mere 5 hours ago, the Kidari had been considered unbeatable. Now their defeat seemed not only possible, but inevitable. Human fleet is closing in on the flagship's fallback point, reported the tactical officer, his voice shaky, as if he himself couldn't quite grasp what was happening. They've surrounded the sector, blocking every escape route. Any signs of Kidari reinforcements? Corvo asked, though he suspected the answer. None, sir. The humans. They've already crippled their supply lines and reserve forces, the officer replied, shaking his head in disbelief. It's over. They have nowhere left to run. Corvo watched as the human ships formed a precise encirclement around the flagship's final refuge. They made no grand gestures, issued no ultimatums. They merely waited, their formation a silent declaration of dominance. It was a statement as clear as if it had been spoken aloud. There is no escape. The human officer, still standing calmly among the coalition commanders, tilted his head slightly. We've transmitted terms of surrender, he announced. The Kidari have 5 minutes to comply. Otherwise, we proceed with final neutralization. Merrick let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the display. And if they don't surrender? He challenged, unable to mask his disdain. You just wipe them out? The human officer's gaze remained impassive. If they choose to reject the terms, then yes, he replied evenly. But understand, our goal is not destruction. It's resolution. The end of a conflict so decisively that it cannot resume. Corvo felt a knot in his stomach. The humans operated on an entirely different wavelength, where war was not about glory or honor, but about efficiency and finality. They didn't leave room for ambiguity. In their hands, war was a tool to enforce peace, to sculpt the galaxy into a shape where resistance was simply impractical. "The Kidari flagship is responding," the comms officer cut in, tension lacing his voice. They're requesting terms." A murmur ran through the Coalition command room. Could it be? After years of war, was it really coming to an end? "Put it on," Corvo ordered, trying to maintain an air of authority despite the surreal situation. The holographic display shifted to show the bridge of the Kidari flagship. The Kidari commander appeared on screen, eyes burning with a mixture of rage and fear. His uniform was disheveled, his once imposing demeanor reduced to a semblance of controlled panic. "We acknowledge your terms, human," the commander spat, his voice trembling. "But know this. You have only won through trickery and deceit, not strength." The human officer stepped forward, his expression unchanged. "You lost because you relied on old doctrines outdated by eons," he said calmly. "Strength lies not in brute force, but in adaptability and understanding every facet of conflict. We offered you a chance to end this peacefully long before today. You chose otherwise." The Kidari commander glared, his defiance hanging by a thread. For a moment it seemed he might lash out, reject the terms out of sheer spite. But then he glanced around his own bridge at the faces of his officers, and the weight of reality settled in. The humans had cornered them, stripped them of every advantage, and now held the galaxy's attention on this final moment. "Very well," the commander muttered, bowing his head. "We surrender." A wave of shock rippled through the Coalition command room. It was over, just like that. Years of grueling conflict, countless lives lost, and endless resources expended had culminated in a surrender within 5 hours of humanity entering the fray. The sheer finality of it left Corvo momentarily speechless. "Transmission confirmed," the comms officer announced, barely containing his own surprise. "The Kidari have ordered all remaining forces to stand down." The human officer nodded, turning to the Coalition commanders. "The war is now officially concluded," he stated simply. "Our ships will begin the stabilization process for Kidari systems, and Coalition forces are free to withdraw to their respective territories." Corvo opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. It felt surreal. The Kidari were defeated not in a drawn-out campaign, but in a surgical strike that lasted mere hours. Humanity had achieved in one engagement what the rest of the galaxy had failed to accomplish over years. But more than that, they had reshaped the entire concept of war. "How?" Corvo finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you prepare for something like this? To end a war so swiftly?" The human officer regarded him with an inscrutable gaze. "We come from a world where conflict is an inherent part of existence," he explained. "Survival demanded we learn to adapt, to innovate, and to end threats with finality. War is not our goal, it's a means to an end, a peace that others will think twice about disturbing." Corvo nodded, absorbing the words. It wasn't just about power, it was about understanding, about preparing for every eventuality. Humanity had honed their methods, trained their minds, and embraced a brutal efficiency that set them apart. They hadn't merely joined the war, they had transcended it, revealing that victory was not a matter of who fought the longest, but who fought the smartest. As the Coalition officers dispersed, Corvo watched the human fleet regroup on the holographic map. They moved with the same quiet precision as they had during the battle, now shifting to their post-war objectives: stabilization, reconstruction. They were not conquerors basking in glory. They were pragmatists already setting the groundwork for what came next. For the first time in years, Corvo felt a strange sense of hope mingled with an edge of fear. Humanity had shown what they were capable of, and the galaxy would never be the same. They had rewritten the rules of war, and in doing so had forged a path toward a peace that could last. The war had ended not with a grand finale, but with a realization that humanity, in its calculated brilliance, had always known exactly when and how to win.